Hello, and welcome to another Witcher 3 REDkit tutorial. I'm Matthias, and today we're going to talk about scene scripts, which are basically used to define scenes that can be played in mid-gameplay. Alongside with that, inside of the scene scripts and using the scene script editor, I'm going to show you how to create screenplay for your scenes and divide it into different sections. Also, how to use different dialogue set templates. Also, we're going to talk about how you can use the overall timeline with setting up different cameras, animation, dialogue choices, and more. So stay tuned and let's jump straight in. I just started a brand new project. This is completely empty, but you can follow along with an already existing project of yours. It really doesn't matter because we only going to work with scenes and not going to edit much with the like levels or custom levels. It really does not matter where you can use these scenes. So if you take a look at this icon called Asset Browser, you can open it. And in here, you will see all your files that are currently allocated in your depot or workspace. Because when you check out a file, then basically it will be located in your workspace. But since nothing is checked out, because it's a new project and I haven't tweaked with any files yet, you can check out the context menu here and you can use this option called Show in Explorer. But once we check out an asset, you will see that now it has this green checkmark icon next to it and no longer this lock icon. And also, when we take a look at the context menu, pressing the right mouse button, you will see that right now we have another option called Show in Explorer Workspace. So if you take a look at the default one, you can actually check where is it residing in your uncooked depot, and in your workspace, you will see that it will open your project folder with the checked out asset. So for scenes, we pretty much can look at already existing ones, like already existing scenes in the quests folder, because most of the quests have their allocated scenes contained into their same folder. So if we take a look at something like Fry, you can also search for them. And let's go with the grid view this time so I can take a look a little bit better what kind of assets I can search for. But you will see that since we search for the keyword fry, there's this scene script called frying pan to woman. And by checking the go to resource home option, you can see where it actually resides. So you can see that it's actually in the quests, minor quests, prologue village, quest files, locked shed, and scenes. So by double-clicking on these scenes, you can actually take a look and open up the scene editor and see how they are constructed. This can take a few seconds until it's opened. But as you can see, the scene script editor will look like this. As you can see at the main viewport, you will see the actual preview of the scene. So for that, we called this tab called preview, and you will see the actual preview of the scene and also the timeline at the bottom. So at the top section, you will have numerous tabs separated by categories. And one of them is the default one is the preview. But by checking the screenplay, you can actually see that we can actually check out what are the exact dialogue lines and what actor is saying what lines in the scene. So you will see a similar construct like where the old woman 03 and Geralt. This basically means that this woman talks to Geralt in this section, and following along, you can see that this is the actual dialogue line that it's said. These different sections are can be toggled with these arrows down at the bottom. And also these sections can be separated and are shown in a separate way in the timeline. So if you have multiple sections, then the timeline will be divided at the top with the same number of sections represented by, so they're basically representing the different dialog lines. So preview, we already talked about that. Starting condition is basically a grid where you can define different, all sorts of very customized conditions and like context to your scene. This can be left as default. It's really much just saying that if you want to have some very specific, I don't know, condition to one of the actors, or maybe use some sort of state with the scene, then you can basically use this grid. At the definitions tab, you can also see numerous grids or tables. These are responsible for basically defining what actors are going to be played at your scene. So what are the actors, how you can reference them, what are the exact entities of these actors. So if you take a look at this reference here, you can actually use this magnifier icon. And by using that, it will actually navigate to that very entity template that the current scene is using. So for this old woman, it's exactly this entity template that's used. And by double clicking on it, we can actually take a look at the entity that's basically used for the actor itself. Okay, and one important thing is that the actor tags are actually the one that's used for referencing the actors throughout the scene. So if you take a look at the scene Screenplay tab, you will see that the where the old woman 03 is used to reference the old woman, and you can take a look at it in the ID column. So this is the exact value that's used for reference and not the whole path of the entity template, which is something that needs to be kept in mind. At the other tables, you can set up different props. So if you want to have a table or chairs or something that's basically will remain as a really important asset of your scene. For example, in this scene, Geralt will basically take a frying pan and give it to the actor called Old Woman. Then these props are needed to be defined in the second table. And as you might have suspected, these props also have some sort of IDs that we can reference them for. So this frying pan entity is also resides in here, but we use a really shorter method called pan, like a much shorter name to actually reference it. So you don't have to type it or don't have to, set the entity templates reference each time you're using the prop, which is convenient. Also, if you have any kind of particle system like a splash of water or some magic effect, then you can also define these in the particle system table. And at the last table, you can actually set up different custom light sources. So let's say that you want to set up your scene with a point light or some very specific light setup, then you can basically define different types of lights and you can use them as well. So I think that's enough for definitions for now. At the debug tab, you can also debug your scenes with all sorts of options at your disposal. But just to keep it simple, I think I'm going to just briefly mention this, that you can have a lot of debug options separated into different tabs where all sorts of debug information will be presented once you play your scenes. And at the F-curves, well, these are rarely used. At least I rarely use this, but mainly you can use this to use very smooth damps of different effects that are played in your scene. So enough for these tabs for now. At the right side, you will see another set of tabs that are basically used to, like the properties tab are basically just showing you the currently selected entities properties. So if I, let's say, choose this camera instance in this timeline, then you will see that it's actually showing the different properties of the camera because that's the one that's currently selected. Same goes for the selection of different sections. So right now I just left-clicked on this section. That's basically representing the dialogue line that the old woman says, and you will see that here are the the properties of that section. And here you have the dialogue line that's being said, the voice file name, and so on. For the cameras, these are actually all the camera instances that you can use. These cameras most likely residing from the dialog set template that I will show you pretty soon. But the point is that all of your cameras or custom cameras that are predefined or saved in any way will show up in this cameras section or tab. Okay, so the contour rig and mimics are also some sort of custom information about the mimic animations or the rig animations that you can use. The same goes for body. You can actually preview these in the body animes section, and same goes for mimics animation. But most of the time, you can also use the anim browser tool that can be actually opened from this editor. And that way you can also preview these animations. So most of the times I rarely ended up using these because of, we didn't even define any reference to these sections. We cannot even see anything in here. Also, the last tab that you can take a look at is the section tab, where you can actually see the different locals that are used up by the section that's currently being selected. So I have selected this section in here, and by going to the section tab, you can actually see different variants that can be set up with different locals. So let's say that we want to have another variant, but this time not with the English base, but any other supported locals like Polish or Deutsch or French or Russian. You can set up different variants for those as well. And in here, you can actually see what are the different mappings that you can have. So for Polish and any other languages, right now we just use the default variant, but you can also set the base for French, for example, and you will see that the scene will change, the scene's locale will change. You will have another option to actually change the local for your variant or the current preview. And here is the drop bar that you can set the scene with. So since I selected France or French for the base of this variant, the default variant, having to take a look at the preview, you will see that right now they are talking French. But if I go back and actually set the English local, and I will set it back in here as well, so I just synced it up, you will see that right now the current language will be switched back to English. Okay, so at the bottom section, we take a look at briefly at the timeline, but there are different components as well. Let's take a look at the graph tab. So the graph that are used up by scenes are really similar looking as the quest graphs, but this time these graphs are only responsible for constructing the scenes, meaning that we have different nodes that are basically supposed to represent the sections. So as you can take a look, I will just highlight, select this MQ004 surprise. This is actually a section that is defined in the screenplay. So if you take a look, here is the section called MQ004 surprise. And you can actually reference this section from inside the graph as well. So by selecting it and taking a look at the properties, you will see what are the exact section name that is referencing to. Also, all sorts of options like, is it supposed to be in gameplay or conditions, number of input paths. Right now it only has one input, and so on. Like there are like a lot of options for these nodes actually. So as I said, this graph is basically constructing your scene, and it's responsible for taking care of all the different conditions and the overall flow of your scene. So let's say that you want to have a scene for a quest where you firstly meet up with the quest giver, and then you want to make sure that the quest giver will only show the get reward option once you completed the quest. So by taking its errand, you can set up a condition like these to actually show a section just when the player is actually completed the errand. So you can set up conditions like this, and based on these conditions, different sections will be shown up. That's pretty much the gist of it. There are also numerous customized nodes that you can use, also scripts or randomizers or flow switches, a lot of options at your disposal. One of the also commonly used nodes types is the minigame nodes. So if you want, let's say that you want to set up a custom NPC with a minigame, you can also do that in the graph as well. I will show you an example of that just in a bit. So I just found another example, what you can use for basically setting up a scene with different dialog choices and having minigames and such, is that you can have different sections that basically define dialog choices. And if you take a look at this example here, you can actually see that dialog choices can be pretty much created inside of the sections inside the screenplay itself. By right-clicking on the actual section, you can actually add a new element, and this element can be a simple dialog line or a quest choice line, which is basically the choice dialog, or just a comment that is basically it will be only visible on the screenplay itself, or something that is scripted, so it's a script line. But for dialog choices, the most common options for that is that either progress the dialogue, or if you are talking with a merchant or someone that you can play cards with, then you can define different dialog choices for that as well. So from inside the graph, you can actually show you can actually define the merchant script that is responsible for setting up the NPC and setting up the scene for that dialog choice to actually shop with the individual. So for that, you can actually use this script called show me goods, and you can actually create this node by right-clicking on the background of the graph, and inside you can use this scripting block. And once you have that, you can actually see that the same type of node will be present. And in here, you have to set up the actual function name that is defined somewhere in the red script. And for that, you can use the show me goods. So I just filtered this for the show me goods, and by double clicking on it, you will see that the script will be set up, and you just need to connect to the dialog line or dialog choice that you want. So that's another option. So for minigames, you can see that there's a dialog choice, play a round of cards or whatever, that makes sense. And it's not actually present in the graph or the scene graph inside. It's just defined and connected to an output. So different outputs can be defined inside the scenes. And these outputs later will be used in a quest graph. So because scenes are most likely be initiated and triggered from inside the quest graph, we can take a look at what are the various examples of that. So for the quest, and that is using the scene that I just previously showed you, you can see that these scene nodes or scene typed nodes are actually used to initiate that scene. So this very scene that I just shown you is referenced right here in this scene property. And by using the magnifier icon, you can see that it is right here. And as you can see, the outputs, some of the outputs that we have seen in the graph, we have really similar outputs like the one called Grant. And if you take, if we are taking a step back, you will see that there's an output called that. So the Grant output is actually connected to this node called minigame, which is actually initiating the minigame itself. In this example, Grant, the Grant game or the card game. And you will see that these are the properties that's needed to actually initiate that. But if you want to have something that's actually in the base game, or you want to have take a look at other examples, you can actually search for these nodes. For that, you can actually use this magnifier icon. So I just opened up the Witcher 3 quest asset. You can search for this in the quests folder. So if we check out the quests folder, you will see that there's a quest asset called Witcher 3 quest. And inside, if you open it, you pretty much, can go through all of the quests that the main game has. And the root layer of it, the top layer, is this Witcher 3 game structure. And in here, you can see how the main game actually progresses. But for us right now, we only want to take a look at all sorts of minigame nodes and where are they residing. So for that, I'm just using this magnifier icon. And in here, you can search by different categories, by its type or by a specific name or condition or whatever. But for us, the type tag will be pretty much good for us because we just want to search all of the nodes that has the minigame type. Okay, so I just selected the type that I wanted, and by pressing the magnifier, you can see that these are all the kind of results. These are all the minigames that are somewhere allocated in the main game. And you can, take a look at each of these and just take a look at how they are initiated. So you can use these as a pretty good example to set up a minigame for your own scenes. So this is the one thing that I wanted to show you. Okay, so now that we had a brief overview of all the different techniques that you can use with a typical scene, let's start finally by creating our own. So for that, you can pretty much create all kind of scene assets inside any folder that you like. I'm just gonna, follow upon the default technique that is basically I'm gonna create some kind of scene script asset inside the quests folder of the default. If you have any kind of custom quest that you want to create the scene for and it's somewhere residing inside the quest like this, then you can, create that scene script inside of your quests folder. Right now, I just only want to make sure that, I create it somewhere inside the quest. So I'm just going to create it in the root folder. So by creating a scene script, you need to right click at the background of your asset browser, click on create, and look for an asset called scene script. And let's give it a name. It can be anything as long as it's, it doesn't have any spaces and it's also all lowercase. So for us, It can be anything. I'm just gonna create mod scene tutorial or something like so. And by giving it giving a name to it, it will be shown in the current folder that you have chosen. This time it's just in the root. So let's open it. Okay, so the very first thing that we probably want to define is in the definitions. So let's choose our actors who are going to be present to our scene. For that, we can use our custom NPCs, but for now, just to keep it simple, I'm just going to use already existing characters. And for that, I'm just going to hop over the characters tab, NPC entities. And in here, you can either use some of the main NPCs that are used in the main story of the Witcher 3 game, or some secondary NPCs as well. So for us, maybe we can use something like the coroner NPC. And to actually give the reference to coroner, we can just, add an element in the definitions tab. Right now, we don't have anything to set, but don't worry about that. Okay, and a filter can be left empty because we don't have to, define an appearance to that actor. Because once you set something like an entity template reference to your actor, these entities are most likely defining different appearances to it based on different contexts. And you can actually, force what appearance shall be used throughout the scene itself if the entity has multiple ones. But this time we don't want to worry about that. So for the actor template, we need to give the reference to our NPC's entity. So for that, you just need to select it by left click on the asset browser. And having it selected, you can use this arrow icon button. And by double clicking on it, you will see that the reference will be copied to that folder. Now, very important thing is for the ID and the voice tag ID that will be used to reference the actor. We can sometimes, if we don't see any options in here, then we need to take an extra step. That is, we need to open up the entity itself, and we need to define a voice tag for it. So as you can see, this current NPC has a tab called voice tags. And the reason we couldn't choose any kind of voice tag is that the entity haven't defined anything yet. So for that, we just need to make sure that this voice tag field in here has something. Now, of course, we can pretty much search for something that makes sense, like the coroner. But also, if you're wondering where these voice tags are defined because you want to use custom NPCs and you don't have any voice tag defined to that NPC, then you can take a look at these in the gameplay global section. So all these voice tags are essentially defined inside a CSV file. I'm just going to show you real quick. So inside gameplay globals, you will have all kinds of CSV files that are used up throughout the whole game and its mechanics. And inside of here, we can actually need to search for scene voicetags.csv. So inside of here, you can actually see all of the already defined voice tags, and you can also add yours throughout your custom NPCs or whatsoever. If you have a custom NPC and want to have a different voice tag to it, then this is the place where you can add it. But this time, I'm not gonna tweak around in the scene voice tags because we already have an already defined voice tag called coroner. And the way it works is that we need to set a voice tag for each appearance. And you might wonder, what is this coroner appearance that's already defined in this field? So if you take a look at the appearances tab, you can see all the different appearances that the NPC has, because most of the times you will have more generic, or let's say even an important character, but throughout the story, sometimes they will look differently. Like Siri will sometimes have a cloak on her head, but sometimes she won't. So for that purpose, you can actually define different looks for your NPCs called appearances. And these appearances can actually, connect it to the voice tag. So each time you will use this coroner voice tag inside of your scene, then the scene will know that this appearance needs to be used throughout the scene. And we talked about this appearance filter that's used for forcing another filter or an appearance. But this is something more specific. For us right now, we only need to make sure that we have a voice tag for the entity. And you can see that right now that we set the voice tag for it, by toggling this selection box, the coroner will show up. So that's excellent. And yeah, let's make sure that we save this entity and check it out, because we had some modifications to it. So once we saved it, let's close it and choose the coroner option here. All right. And the other actor of us will be, okay, sometimes the validation report dialog will say whether we have any problems with our scene that, stops us to save the scene, because if there are any malfunctions to it, then the validation report will tell us what to do in order to save the scene successfully. But this time we don't have any struggle yet. So in Add Element, if you choose this option, you can have another row in here. And this time we want to make sure that the player, so Geralt, will be the other actor of our scene. For that, I'll just search for player in the asset browser, because I don't remember exactly where is it resides, but by choosing player, you can actually search for it. And this player.entity v2end is the one that we're searching for. This is what we want. So by going to the resource home, you can actually see that the gameplay templates has it, characters, player, and inside this is the player entity that is basically used to represent Geralt, the player. So let's select this entity and copy its reference. And luckily for us, the voice tag is already defined inside of that entity, so we don't have to worry about that this time. All right. So let's save this once again. So we have our actors. Let's keep the props, particle system lights. Let's not get too fancy with this. Instead, what we want to have is to define some kind of dialog set template. So dialog set templates are pretty much, they are templates with already defined stuff like camera instances and the placements of the actors, because scenes like these have to define some sort of collection of placements for the actors. So if you want to have a scene set up with the dialogue with the two actors facing to each other, then you don't have to define these placements by scratch. We use templates for that because they are really regularly used. So fortunately for us, we can hop over on this dialog set settings tab, and inside we can collect or add in already defined dialog set templates. And for that, we can also search in the gameplay and dialog sets. And in here, you will see that these are all, these are the already defined dialog set templates, like the naming convention as follows. So you have dialog set, and then how many actors and in what positions what positions are they using. So 1 versus 1 around NPCs, most likely something like you have 2 NPCs facing to each other in a circle motion or something. Also, if you have 10 actors, then you have a template for that as well. And yeah, if you have 2 actors facing to another actor, then there's a dialog set template for that as well. If you're not sure what these names mean, then you can also double click on them and open them up, and you will see that these are actually the preview of this dialog set. And in here, you can see the slots that are basically representing the different placements to the actors, the arrows, so how the actors are looking at each other. And also up above, you will see all the different camera instances that this dialog set template contains. So as you can see, there are quite a lot of camera settings at your proposal. So you don't have to, do this all by from scratch. You can actually use these templates, and they help a lot. Okay, but for now, we just only want to have a dialogue between 2 actors. And for that, dialog set 1 versus 1 will be pretty sufficient. So make sure that you select this in the asset browser. And by using this new dialog set, using this page with a plus icon called import dialog set, you can actually import it in. You can actually give it a custom name, but it's not obligatory. You can leave it to its default name. And this is what I'm doing right now. And you will see that the dialog set will appear with the selected name. And right now, these 2 panels are also populated. So the first one is actually the properties of the used dialog set, the name, the placement tag, snap to terrain, and so on. And these are pretty important because these are the slots that define the placements of the actors, or the placements that your actors can use throughout the scene. So the next thing is that we need to set which actor will be located where. So let's go with the slot 1. And in slot 1, let's say that Geralt will stand there. And on the second, we will make sure that the coroner will take the other place. So let's go with coroner. And as you see, I just used the voice tag reference IDs for these as well. And there are several other properties like the actor statuses and the emotion status. So the way how the scenes and animations are set up is that you can define different emotion or actor status states where actors can take up different default poses. Like if you want to make sure that one of the actors would look sad or happy, then you can just pretty much set up the default emotion state as sad or happy. And throughout the scene, the actor will look, sad or whatever. But these are just like high tunings of your actors to make them a little bit more, to make them a little bit more realistic, let's say. So for us, let's say that coroner will look, I don't know, surprised or determined. So for that, we can just, set these. There are a lot of options are there. And poses, of course, because sometimes scenes will have different poses. So if you want to make sure that in your scene, the 2 actors will sit down throughout the whole scene, then you can just pretty much set this actor pose name to sitting, and that way they will sit down. So as you can see, there are not much going on in the timeline, nor the graph and nor the preview, because as you can see, we already have the dialog set, but we haven't used it up yet. And another important thing to note is the placement tag. This is actually the tag reference to the waypoint node that will be used to actually place your scene inside of your world. So this is something that needs to be kept in mind. All right. So for us, let's use a pretty simple graph this time. As you can see, the default structure of a graph consists of an input, a section node, and an output. Let's connect these. So we have the overall flow of the scene. And for the section, I'm just going to use the dialog set change to. So I selected this section node here. And in the properties, I'm going to actually search for the dialog set that we have imported. And by selecting this, this section will actually use this dialog set. So you can actually define or use multiple dialog sets for different sections that would make sense throughout the scene. All right. And let's give it a name as well. For that, I can actually, I don't know, let's go with an introduction. So the two actors will introduce themselves or something. And once I've selected this dialog set for the section, you will see that the preview now is populated with the slots. And to actually see them better, you can use these 3 camera options in here. The first one is the preview one. The second one is actually the one that is acting a lot like the main viewport. So if you want to move around, navigate around freely, then you can use the second option. And the third camera option is actually used to set the properties of the cameras of an already existing scene, because once you saved a camera, you will not necessarily set its properties. So we can, of course, navigate ourselves throughout the scene, but if we're using the preview option, we don't see much, and also the timeline looks pretty empty. The reason for that is that we haven't defined any dialog lines yet, and these dialog lines per section will pretty much define all the sections for us, and the base of this timeline will always construct around the sections that these screenplay dialog lines define. So let's define a pretty simple screenplay for us. So by left-clicking to the title, you can press Enter, and that way the first dialog line is inserted, and you will see that the timeline has this section already inside. And the first thing that you need to define is that who is speaking to whom. So let's say that Geralt will be the one who speaks first, and by default, it will set the other actor as the receiver, because we only have 2 actors. So Geralt will speak to Coroner, and the third thing is the actual line that you want to set, what the actor will say. So let's go with hello there. And then pressing enter, you will see that another dialog line will be inserted. So now we have 2 sections. And this time Coroner will talk to Geralt, like so. Pressing enter. Okay, sometimes it will stuck. Don't worry about that. You can actually save your scene, and then most of the times it will go away, and it won't, make much of an obstacle, because you can proceed whether this is shown or not. The point is that you need to set the Coroner and Geralt actions or actors. So the second line is, hey. Okay, so actually to save everything accordingly, so save your dialog lines, they needed to be saved inside the string database as well, and also the scene structure needs to be saved as well. So to make sure everything is saved accordingly, let's choose this apply changes button and then hit on save. All right, so we have a pretty simple scene structure, and you will see that the timeline is now populated with all the actors that we use. So the first section is Coroner, and you can toggle these, and also Geralt. And you can actually zoom in and out using the scroll wheel button. And you will see that the section will be separated using Geralt and Coroner. And also, you will see that these sections already have some sort of length aligned to it. So the editor will try to guess, based on the line that you have put in, is how long it's supposed to be. It's only a guess from the editor's side. But later on, once you have your audio and lip sync animation to your scene, the length of the section will change accordingly to the length of the audio that is actually used. So you might wonder, how are we supposed to set all the animations and like specifically time the events throughout the timeline if we don't have the audio? Well, we don't have to worry about that, because all the animations and all the events that are placed throughout the timeline is based upon the percentage and not actual timestamps. So meaning, if you have an animation that starts throughout the currently used timeline of the section, once the section will be changed, the animation will change to the length accordingly, to the exact percentage. So you don't have to worry about changing the placement and the length of the animations. And these are used, this technique is used when you are trying to use different locales to your scene. Because, you know, a sentence said in English is not necessarily going to be with the same length of another language, for example, French. So by using percentage values, you will pretty much be saved from this struggle. Okay, so we have the sections, and by setting the preview, you will see that we actually have our actors already allocated to the slots. So the slot 1 is for Geralt and slot 2 is for Coroner. All right, and once we play the scene, you will see that the dialogue lines are set according to the timeline. And so another thing is that different sections can be switched. So the preview will only show you one section at a time, and you can actually change the currently played section by these arrows in here. All right. So let's put in an animation. So first, I think Geralt will speak. So we have to define an animation for Geralt, and because of that, we need to make sure that we are inside the Geralt section. So I just untoggled Geralt's group, and in here you will see that there's a track called animations. And in here, I can actually add different things like animations. And of course, you can actually insert an animation event called add actor event and animation. This is one of the ways. And also there is another way. If you double click on the title track node, or this section in here, then you can actually have this, this is a helping dialog where you can actually search for animations a little bit more easily, maybe, and you can also filter them through. So for gestures, we can actually use all these animations in here. So let's go with, I don't know, let's choose this U animation. And you can actually set the length of these animations, but let's just take a look how it looks. Okay, and you will see that right now Geralt is playing this animation. And if you're not happy with this, you can actually use Ctrl-Z to remove it, or just right-click on it and you have this delete option. And another method is to actually change the event or the animation that you want to use for here. And if you select this animation event, and on the properties, under Story Scene Event Animation, there's a property called animation name, which is the actual animation name that is being used right now. And you will notice that there's a cursor looking button. And if you select that by left clicking, an anim browser will be opened for the exact animation that was used. But you can also select another one, like standing determined or anything really. And these animations are also separated within different categories. So if you say that we have another category called, I don't know, Geralt exploration, you will see that there's all sorts of movement animations in here. And also you can search for animations like, I don't know, wave. Okay, but as you can see, these animations are separated through different actor states, as I show you in the dialog set settings. So this animation is for the actor status called sitting. So that is one thing that you need to make sure. But this time our actors are standing, so we need to make sure that we select the wave animation inside the dialog standing section. Once you have your animation that you want to use, just click on OK. And that's that. Okay, let's talk about how to allocate different cameras for your scene. So since we have a dialog set inputted in here, we can use the already defined camera instances that the dialog set already defined for us. And inside the cameras tab at the right, you will see that these are all the camera options that we can use. Make sure that you are in the second camera option called Enable Free Camera Mode to actually take a look at all the camera instances. So by left clicking them, you will see that all kind of camera positions will be shown up in the preview. So let's go with this 1 to 2 close up next. So the first actor to the second close up exterior. By selecting this camera option, this will be not enough on its own. We have to make sure that the camera is saved in the timeline as well. So I want to make sure that this camera is used right at the start. So I just clicked on this stop button. And in the inside the camera track, I use the add camera. And you will see that you either can just use the from list and select the camera from the list. But since we already have the preview, the camera position at our preview, we can use the from view option. So the from view option is basically gonna save the exact same site that the camera is currently looking at. So if I'm just gonna scroll through in the far distance and want to make sure that I want to use this camera option, then you can use the same option, add camera from view, and it will save the exact position and rotation of your camera. And the scene will also use that as well, which is pretty neat. So we have our first camera option, and to actually, preview how the scene will look like with the currently used camera instance, you need to go back to the preview mode. You can also toggle between these options using the num keys. So first is the preview, second is the free camera mode, third is the edit mode. Right, so the first will show you the preview. It will toggle the camera preview to the saved camera instance. So let's apply another camera, and this time I just want to make sure that it's something more different like this, where both of the actors are clearly visible. And the camera instance will be saved at the timestamp, the current timestamp of the scene. And the current timestamp of the scene is represented by this red line at the middle. Right now it resides in 1.61. And by actually adding a camera from view, you will see that it will be inserted to the current timestamp, which is something that needs to be noted. Okay, and going back to the preview mode, stop, let's play the scene. You will see that the cameras will switch accordingly. Okay, so let's go with another animation, but this time for the coroner. So I'm just going to put the timestamp in here. You can also move the timestamp line by left clicking on the marker at the bottom. So you will see that right now it's 1.71. And by grabbing it, you can actually drag the timestamp, and also by left clicking, it will jump right to the location of your cursor, which is neat. So in here, I want to add another animation for coroner. So let's open coroner and animations, gesture, and let's go with right hand one. It really does not matter because you can select any other animations throughout the properties itself. So you can, choose anything in this animation name. But this time I think it's pretty good for us. All right. And another thing is that we might want to talk about is the additives that you can use. And for that, you can actually use the additives track, for example, to make an actor look at something. You can also change the light position, so you can, take a look at the actors a little bit better, because the light position sometimes, will not brighten them up as you would expect. So let's say that we want to make Geralt to take a look at something else than the other actor. For that, you can use the additives menu, add actor event, and look at point cloud. So this option is actually used to determine the actors and their look at events. And you have different types of methods that you can use for look at events. One of them is actually saying that whether you want to have your actor looking at this thing with its whole body, or just its head, or you just want to set the actor's eyes to take a look at the thing that you want. But this time maybe we want to make it more visible to us. So let's set the body option. All right. And you can see that right now it's tried to look at the test entity or custom entity that is actually used for that purpose. But you can set the target to something else as well. So the body target, for example, can be another actor. But this time we want to make sure that Geralt will look at something different than the other actor. But if you want to make sure that an actor wants to take a look at another actor because the dialogue is switched to, let's say that we have a 2 versus 1 scenario, well, an actor wants to talk with someone and then someone else, then you can use this look at events. But this time, I just want to make sure that Geralt will look at the other way while saying its dialogue. All right, let's save this. Let's go back to the preview, timeline. And right now you will see that Geralt will look at the entity's position, which is neat. All right. And one last thing that I wanted to show you is to actually preview your scenes in a more deterministic environment, because right now all we can see in this preview option is the actors and everything that's essentially necessary for our scene. But you can actually preview this scene in different worlds, so you can have a better understanding how they might look like inside of the environment that you want to use your scene for. So for that, we need to load in a level. I'm just going to use an already existing level like Prologue Village. All right. By default, nothing will be loaded in, so the world might look a little empty for us. So I'm just going to make sure that I load everything up. So I just selected the root node, load all in group. This might take a few seconds. So let's say if you want to load in everything in Novigrad, which is the largest level in the game, then you probably need to wait a little bit more. But this time, since we used Prologue Village, which is a smaller map, we could load it in pretty fast. So for us, I just want to make sure that I place in the scene, and let's say that we want to play the scene next to this windmill. So for that, we need to define a waypoint that can be used as the placement of the scene. So for us, let's just make sure that we can see the waypoints. For that, I just opened up Settings, Editor Options, Debug, and Waypoints. Save and close, and you can see that there are quite a few already defined points in here. So you can go ahead and create a new layer or use an existing one, and by double clicking on it, you can create another waypoint or a spawn point, gameplay spawn point, or add spawn point, or you can use an already defined waypoint like this. Okay, so just select this, and in the properties, you will have the tag, its tag. So in the properties, you have the CNode tag, both for the component and the actual entity. So since the same value is used for both, I'm just going to make sure that I copy this. All right. So by double clicking on it, I can highlight this and copy it. And going back to our scene, we can set the dialog set settings, and you will see that this is the placement tag that I previously mentioned. And you can actually use this to insert your waypoints reference. Okay, sometimes won't work. You can actually see the currently used level and all its layers. But this time I just wanted to set the waypoint right. So you can just copy it in. You will see that the same tag reference is used for the placement tag as well. Let's save this. And from now on, you can actually preview your scene in the world itself, and it will be placed, the scene will be placed to that waypoint. So there are two options at your proposer. One of them is the load world, where the world will be loaded inside of your scene preview viewport. The other option is this globe with an arrow icon. This will do the same, but instead of using the viewport of your scene editor, the scene will be shown up in the viewport, in the main viewport. So this is the difference between these two. Let's use both of them. So first, I'm just gonna go ahead and click on the left globe icon, and you will see that something already happened. It loaded up quite a few stuff that resides in your world. So the reason for not everything is shown up in the scene viewport itself is because the scene will make sure that only the stuff that the cameras are showing is visible. And also sometimes the already defined occlusion is not going to be compatible with the used camera instances. So it's not always the best option to use. If you have similar problems, then I guess we could use the other camera option, which is much more sufficient, I think, is to just actually load the scene into the main viewport. So as you can see, once I selected that option, the viewport just disappeared. Everything remains to be there. You can actually toggle this scene editor and put it on the other display. And this time you can see the scene inside of our main viewport. So having to take a look at the timeline and switch on the edit camera mode, or just press the 2 num key, you will see that right now the scene is located in here. So since we have this house right next to the scene, maybe that caused us not to see much of the parts of the scene in the other viewport, because the occlusion was already cooked in a way to not show anything in that position. But this time we can actually see the scene, and if I hit on play on the timeline, so if I hit on play, you can actually see the scene playing inside of your world. So you can actually take a closer look, or a better look, how it will look like once the scene will be played inside of that world in that very location. So I think that's enough that I wanted to say for scenes and how to use the scene script editor as an introduction. I hope you found this video quite useful. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. And without any further ado, have fun